Deep within the misty ridges of the Appalachian mountains stood a cabin that few dared to approach. Its windows were boarded, its chimney rarely smoked. And yet, one morning, the village woke to a sight that could not be ignored. A young girl, pale and frail, walked the dirt path with a swollen belly. But no one in the valley knew who the father was. At first, whispers spread like sparks in dry grass. Some swore a drifter had passed through, others insisted it must have been a secret lover. Yet the more people speculated, the more the family shut themselves away. The cabin door, once creaking open for trade, now remained locked at all hours. Curtains drawn, lamps extinguished before strangers could glimpse what lay inside. As the months passed, the girl's stomach grew heavier. Her eyes sank deeper into shadow. It was not the glow of motherhood the villagers saw. It was dread. When the child finally came into the world, those who caught even the faintest glimpse said the infant's face looked far too familiar. Not the mark of an outsider, but of someone within those very walls. This was no ordinary pregnancy. It was the first breath of a bloodline that would become one of the darkest secrets in American history. But this was just the beginning. What unfolded next shocked even their neighbors. For as long as anyone could remember, the family had lived in those mountains. Their cabin clung to the slope like a scar that refused to heal. They never came to town unless forced, and even then they spoke little, their eyes darting like cornered animals. Far from schools, far from churches, far from the reach of law, they became a story unto themselves. To the villagers, their very name carried a strange weight. When it was spoken at all, it was done in hushed tones, around campfires, in the backs of barns, in whispers not meant for children's ears. Some claimed their bloodline had been cursed since the days of the Civil War. They said a soldier had returned to the hills broken and bitter, swearing never to mix with outsiders again. From that oath came generations who married only their own, until the tree of life twisted back upon itself. But others denied any curse. They said it wasn't fate. It was a choice, a willful isolation. Brothers wed sisters, cousins joined cousins, and children were born already bound to the sins of their parents. The valleys carried endless stories. Farmers who had seen the children peeking from boarded windows, faces pale, eyes glassy, all too identical. Hunters who swore they heard strange cries echoing from the hills, cries that were not quite animal and not quite human. And yet, no stranger was ever seen crossing that threshold. No visitors, no friends, no outsiders, only brothers, only sisters. And with each passing year, the whispers grew darker. Some said the family was hiding deformities too horrible to witness. Others claimed the devil himself had taken their house as a sanctuary, but the villagers never dared to ask questions aloud. Curiosity, they believed, was dangerous. To name the evil too clearly was to bring it closer. And so, silence wrapped the town, while shadows thickened around that lonely cabin. But the truth was far darker. What secret made the villagers too afraid to speak? The first real horror revealed itself when the girl's secret could no longer be hidden. Her swollen belly had been explained away with lies, with silence, with locked doors. But silence has a way of breaking. When the cries of a newborn echoed from the cabin one winter night, the villagers knew the truth could not be contained forever. At first, they waited for a glimpse, hoping against their dread that the child would look like an outsider, some nameless man who had passed through the valley. But when the girl was finally seen with the baby in her arms, all hope died. The child's face was unmistakable. Its eyes mirrored the round, glassy stare of her younger brother. Its jawline carried the unmistakable shape of her father. Neighbors whispered in horror. This was no stranger's child. This was the blood of the same roof, reborn in a body too fragile for the world. The whispers turned to certainty, and certainty turned to fear. For generations, people had suspected the family of marrying only their own, but never had they seen the evidence so clearly. The walls of secrecy had cracked. The lie had collapsed. But instead of ending the nightmare, this birth sealed it. What should have been the end of a rumor became the beginning of a cycle. The family did not stop. They did not repent. Instead, they closed their doors tighter, retreated deeper into the shadows, and began a tradition that could never be undone. The girl, once a child herself, was now both mother and sister to the infant she cradled, and those who heard its weak cries swore the sound was not only haunting, it was wrong. As if the blood inside it carried something twisted, something already broken. This was not just a single sin. It was the spark of a fire that would consume the family from within, generation after generation. But this was only the first truth. What happened when the entire family became trapped in this cycle? The neighbors had always whispered, but now their fear grew into something unbearable. What had once been rumor was now truth too heavy to ignore. They noticed that the family's children never appeared in the village schoolhouse. They never joined the other boys and girls in chasing fireflies through the fields or running barefoot through the summer dust. Instead, the only glimpses came at the edges of the woods. Pale figures, awkwardly shaped, their movements stiff and unnatural. Some swore their eyes seemed too far apart, their faces blurred by something almost unfinished. The sight was enough to chill the bravest hunter. By nightfall, doors were bolted with iron hooks. Mothers gathered their children inside before the sun dipped below the ridges. Fathers warned sons to never walk the mountain path, no matter the hour. In whispers, the villagers agreed. To speak the family's name aloud was to risk drawing their curse into your own home. Fear spread like smoke. Some claimed they had heard cries from the hills that didn't belong to animals. Others swore they saw shadows moving near the tree line long after midnight, shapes too small for men and too tall for children. But no one dared climb the path to see. Confrontation was unthinkable. The village kept its silence, not from ignorance, but from survival. It was safer not to know, safer not to speak. Silence became the only shield against a truth too horrible to face. But the undeniable evidence came when a doctor examined their children. What did he see? When a local doctor was finally called to the cabin on the mountain, he expected nothing more than a simple fever or a broken bone. But what he discovered shook him so deeply that his hands trembled for days afterward. The children were unlike anything he had seen before. Their bodies bore marks of a bloodline too tightly wound upon itself. One child's spine curved grotesquely, forcing her to walk bent nearly in half. Another's palate was split wide open, leaving his words garbled, his breath wheezing through the unnatural opening. Their eyes, clouded, grey, ancient, as if centuries of pain had settled inside their pupils. The doctor tried to speak with them, but their language was broken, fragmented, little more than sounds stitched together. Their movements were stiff, mechanical, as though their muscles were not guided by life, but by something that resisted it. Each gesture seemed like a struggle against the body that carried it. He wrote reports in his study late into the night, his quill scratching furiously across the page. He described the twisted limbs, the stunted growth, the shadows of hereditary disease etched into young flesh. But every report was quietly buried, locked away in drawers, never sent to the state, never reaching the outside world. The truth was too disturbing, too dangerous. The doctor realized with growing horror what he was truly witnessing. These were not random misfortunes. These were victims of inbreeding so relentless, so generational, that it had transformed life into torture. Each child carried not only the sins of their parents, but the weight of every forbidden union that had come before. Their very blood rebelled against itself, tearing the children apart from within. He tried to help. He begged the family to allow him to take some of the children to a hospital in the nearest city. But pride ran deeper than compassion. The patriarch refused, insisting that no outsider would interfere. Their secrets were their own, their blood was their own. Even as it poisoned them, they clung to it with a terrifying stubbornness. The doctor left the cabin with a heavy silence in his chest. He knew that what he had seen was not the end. It was only the beginning of something far worse. For if this was what the first generation looked like, what horrors would the next bring? And this was just the first generation. Imagine what happened to the next. What began as a hidden sin soon grew into something far more monstrous. The family's secret was no longer a single crime, a single child, or even a single generation. It became a cycle, a curse stitched into their very blood. Sons grew into fathers. Fathers claimed their own daughters. And those daughters, robbed of innocence, gave birth to children who already carried deformity in their bones. Each new birth was not a blessing, but a sentence. It was as though the womb itself had become a prison, locking generations into the sins of the past. By the second generation, the deformities had grown worse. Some children stumbled on twisted legs, dragging themselves across dirt floors. Others could not form words at all, their cries breaking only into eerie, animal-like sounds that echoed through the cabin walls. And by the third generation, horror took its truest shape. There were children who could not walk. They crawled on, their elbows and knees, their bodies too weak, their bones too fragile. Their cries drifted out into the mountain hollows like ghostly wails, sounds that chilled anyone unlucky enough to pass through the forest at night. Neighbors who once whispered now stopped speaking altogether. They dared not even glance at the cabin when they passed the mountain trail. Some said they had seen shadows of crawling figures in the yard at dusk, their bodies bent and broken, lit only by the last red glow of sunset. Inside the cabin, time itself seemed twisted. There was no difference between past and present, only a constant cycle of repetition. Each daughter knew what awaited her. Each son grew into the shadow of the man before him, and no matter how grotesque the children became, the family refused to leave the mountain, refused to break the chain. For them, it was no longer just a family. It was a bloodline unraveling, each branch curling back into itself, like a snake devouring its own tail. The air in the cabin was thick with rot, candle smoke, and the stench of bodies never meant to be born. To live inside those walls was to live inside a tomb where the dead had never been buried. And yet, the darkest moment was still to come. Because in one chilling night, a daughter was forced into something even the whispers of the villagers could not fully describe. But the darkest moment came when a daughter was forced to. The story reached its most disturbing point when the patriarch himself decided to take complete control. For decades, the villagers had whispered of curses, of sins, of a family too entangled in its own blood. But in the eyes of the man who ruled the cabin, it was never a curse. To him, it was destiny. The patriarch declared that their bond was sacred, that outsiders could never understand what he called their purity. He told his children that the world beyond the mountains was diseased, full of corruption and decay. Only within their bloodline, he said, could truth survive. But beneath those twisted words was a darker hunger. His own daughter, barely more than a child herself, was forced to bear his child. The act was not whispered, not hidden, but carried out under his roof, in the same rooms where generations before had already been broken. And with that single act, the cycle was sealed forever. Neighbors living in the valleys below reported screams, echoing through the forest at night. They heard wails of terror carried on the wind, the sound of something human yet twisted, too sharp, too long. But no one dared to climb the mountain path. To enter that cabin was to invite the curse into your own blood. And so they stayed silent, clutching their doors shut, praying the sound would fade by dawn. Inside, the patriarch ruled like a king of shadows. He decided who lived, who carried, who gave birth. The walls of his home became a prison of flesh and blood, where no child entered by love, and no child was born by choice. The cries of the newborns echoed in every corner, a chorus of suffering that blurred the line between life and death. To him, each new child was proof of his vision. Proof that the world was wrong and he was right. He told his followers, the broken, trembling children that called him father, that their bloodline was chosen, that their deformities were marks of strength, not weakness. In the flicker of firelight, his madness grew radiant, transforming cruelty into ritual, and yet beneath his control, silence did not mean peace. It meant terror. The daughter he had forced into motherhood sat alone, rocking her newborn in the dim glow of a candle. Her tears fell like rain onto the baby's face, knowing she was both mother and sister, victim and prisoner. That child would grow into the same nightmare, trapped in a cycle older than itself. The cabin, from a distance, became something otherworldly. At night, a strange red glow seemed to seep from its roof, as if the house itself were bleeding. Travelers who passed on rare occasions swore they could see the walls pulse faintly, as though the wood had absorbed too much suffering and now lived with it. This was not merely a family secret anymore. It was a ritual of horror, carved into generations. The patriarch had taken sin and crowned it with pride, turning shame into a throne. His madness had ensured that the bloodline would never be free. But the real question remained, how could such horror remain hidden for so long? But the real question is, how was this horror hidden for so long? For years, the whispers had grown louder. Farmers spoke of figures crawling at dusk, of screams that traveled on the wind, of a cabin that seemed to breathe with the suffering inside it. Authorities ignored the rumors, until they could not anymore. One autumn, a group of lawmen, hardened men who had seen violence and poverty, finally climbed the mountain path. They expected to find a simple case of neglect, maybe a crime of desperation. But when they broke open the cabin door, what they saw made even the strongest among them recoil. Inside, the air was heavy and suffocating, thick with the smell of rot and unwashed bodies. Lantern light cut through the shadows, revealing dozens of children. Some were crouched in corners, staring with glassy, unfocused eyes. Others crawled across the dirt floor, their limbs bent, their bodies frail, their movements unnatural. The silence was broken only by strange cries, half moans, half wails, that echoed off the wooden walls like the voices of ghosts. The lawmen froze. These were not scenes from poverty alone. This was something else, something unholy. The walls themselves told a story. Stains of decay spread across the boards. Old bedding lay in heaps, soaked with years of filth. Cribs lined one side of the room, too many for a single family. And in every corner, the weight of secrets pressed down, suffocating anyone who dared to breathe inside. Some of the children reached out, crawling toward the lanterns, their eyes squinting as if they had never seen true light before. Their fingers scraped against the dirt, dragging their frail bodies forward, trembling with both fear and desperate hope. Photos were taken that day, harsh, clinical flashes of truth, but they were locked away, never shown to the public. Perhaps they were too disturbing, or perhaps they threatened to reveal a side of the mountains no one wanted the world to see. The family was broken apart, but liberation came too late. Many of the children were too far gone to survive outside those walls. Their lives had been forged in darkness, and the world beyond was a place their fragile bodies and fractured minds could not endure. The lawmen left the cabin with heavy silence. They had entered expecting to enforce the law, but what they uncovered was something older, something deeper, something no courtroom could ever put on trial, and even now, decades later, the story is rarely spoken aloud. For some it is shame, for others, fear. But perhaps the true reason is darker still, because if it happened once in the hidden corners of the Appalachian Mountains, could it happen again? And even today, why is this story kept so hidden? Could it happen again? Today, the cabin itself is gone. The wooden walls collapsed long ago, swallowed by moss, vines, and the slow patience of the forest. But though the building has rotted back into the earth, the story has never truly died. It lingers in whispers, carried on the wind, told around campfires in the Appalachian hills. For those who know it, the tale stands as a chilling reminder of what happens when isolation, secrecy, and silence grow stronger than morality. It is proof that the darkest horrors are not born in cities or on battlefields, but in the hidden corners of families too afraid or too proud to let light in. Some hikers claim that even now, strange cries can be heard at night near the site where the cabin once stood. They describe sounds too fragile, too broken, like the wails of children who never learned words. Others insist the mountain holds more than just memories, that families just like this one still exist, tucked away in deeper hollows, unseen by the modern world, repeating the same sins in endless cycles. Perhaps the most unsettling part is not what happened in that cabin, but the possibility that it wasn't the only one. The Appalachians stretch for hundreds of miles, filled with isolated valleys, forgotten roads, and homes no map ever marked. Who can say what shadows remain, hidden where no outsider has ever walked? This story is not just history. It is a warning about silence, a warning about secrets, and a warning about what happens when human beings choose blood over conscience. The cabin may be gone, but the echoes remain. Some secrets, after all, never truly vanish. But the final question remains: what would you do if you stood before this house? This was not just the story of one girl, one child, or even one family. It was the darkest reminder of what festers when silence takes the place of truth and when blood ties become shackles instead of bonds. Generation after generation, they destroyed themselves, locked in a cycle no outsider dared to break. Their story ended not with justice, not with healing, but with shadows that refused to fade. And though the cabin is gone, its memory clings to the Appalachian hills like fog that will never lift. Perhaps, even now, the bloodline has not ended. Perhaps the whispers still echo through the trees, carried on the wind, waiting for the next curious traveler to stumble too close. Perhaps the screams are still out there, hidden beneath the forest floor, buried but not gone. And perhaps, somewhere in those mountains, their blood still lingers. The true horror of this tale is not that it happened once, but that it could happen again. For where there is secrecy, where there is isolation, and where fear silences truth, darkness always finds a way to return, and now the story is yours to carry. If you had the courage to hear this truth, then don't forget to like and subscribe, because some secrets are never truly buried.